Welcome. My name is Dr. Hemming Cho. I'm the Secretary Co-Chair of Progressive Democrats of America, California, here in San Francisco. And I am just so pleased and thrilled that so many people are working hard, are participating and communicating with us about how to make the ADEMS process more fair, more equitable, and more functional. Um, Before we begin this meeting, I wanted to first acknowledge the land that we are standing on is Ohlone Chochenyo, and to give a moment of silence for all of our fallen brothers and sisters and the communities that still stand and are fighting to have themselves recognized and for the land to be cared for. Thank you so much. I wanted to also, before we continue, to just acknowledge where we are in a pandemic with so many people out of work, suffering, grieving over lost ones. And I just wanted to say that we need to be here for each other and to help lift each other up in order to survive together and to create equity and justice for all of us. And that is why we're here today. So I just wanted to take a moment for that because I know that people are going through so much. So I really appreciate everybody who's taken the time out to join us today. Um, Today's forum is going to be a little bit different because of the topic. And I wanted to first say thank you to the organizers and to the panelists today. I'm going to go through the very brief explanation of our code of conduct before I introduce the speakers. And then they're going to be in conversation around the history and how ADEMs went this year and their experiences, and then we will open it up for questions that will come to us through the chat box. So the code of conduct that we maintain at Progressive Democrats of America is mutual respect, assumption of good faith, stepping up and stepping back. Step up if you haven't spoken, step back if you've already made your point or spoken once. We observe progressive stack, so those people from underrepresented and under-resourced communities can have a voice and have an equal place at the table. And that if there is a difficult issue that comes up, that we're all going to take a breath and step back and try to participate with each other cooperatively, because this is our community and we have to treat each other with the most respect here in these safe spaces in order that we can project that harmony and cooperation and love and understanding out into the world. So thank you for letting me do that. Today's speakers are Tisa Rodriguez, who is the Riverside chair of the Democratic Party and has been a delegate and a member of the CADEM executive board for several years. And she's committed to equitable inclusion and participation for all levels of involvement. John Sanders is also from San Francisco, like me, a community activist and champion of progressive causes and candidates. He's a former chair of San Francisco Behavioral Health Commission, and he's a current DSA member on the Afro-Socialist and Homelessness Committees. This was his very first time running for ADEMs, and he did a marvelous job. And our third speaker is Mike Thaller, who is the chair of our Progressive Democrats of America, California, and has been a longtime participant in Democratic Party politics, and he is our fearless leader here today. I just wanted to thank all of the speakers and begin to give it over. They are going to speak in reverse order. It will be Mike Thaller, then Tisa Rodriguez, and then John Sanders. Take it away, Mike.
Okay, thank you very much. I thought I would start with, since so many of the people that are participating in this meeting may not know much about the Democratic Party, I thought I'd start with a very brief org chart without the actual chart, just to explain where the ADEMs fit in the group. So at the top of the Democratic Party is the president. And below that is the DNC, Democratic National Committee, which has a chair. And from the California point of view, below that is the California Democratic Party, oftentimes called the CDP. The CDP itself has a bunch of members called Democratic State Central Committee members, and they are made up of 3 different groups that get into the party in 3 different ways. 1/3 of them are brought in through their various, one of the 53 central committees in the state. There's a central committee for each county. That's approximately 1/3 of the members. Another third are the state legislators, all the way from governor on down to assembly and state senate. And they each get appointees. So that makes 1/3. And then the other third come in through, they are basically just the grassroots Democrats, and they are come in through an election meeting called the Assembly District Election Meetings, ADEMs, and that's what we're here to talk about today. There's about 3,500 members of the party. They're also called delegates. And those 3,500, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 is the way it's supposed to be split up. So we get, and today we're talking about the ADEMs, and there's a long history of it that I think Tisa's planning on talking about. And as the interest in the party has grown in the grassroots, the ADEMs have become more and more competitive and important. With that, I think I will pass it on. Well, let me just say there have been problems throughout, and that's also what we want to discuss. And we want to talk about what we can do perhaps to help out those problems and what the CDP itself has done to help out those problems. And I was a major part of that, so I'm ready to talk on how the attempt was made to vastly improve the ADEMs, the election meetings, and where it could be improved in the future. So Tisa's going to talk a bit about the, well, I'll let her tell you what she's going to talk about. Tisa? Who is muted? There you go.
I'm here. Just trying to make sure I have no background noise. Thank you so much, Mike. Thank you, Heyman. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, John, and congratulations on your win. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of the history and what the kind of the differences are in the different ways. We have this idea that the ADEMs are kind of the people's way of becoming a delegate, which honestly is not correct at all. It's sort of a fix. So what it started out is back in the day, we had basically we had what is functionally was the ADEMs for everybody. You ran to be a delegate in your assembly district, and it was kind of what it was. You won the top seats and then you moved on, except what typically would happen is the electeds would bring people in to come and run for those seats. Not too many people ran because not too many people really knew what they were. So, you know, it would be the people that were brought in and that were helped along by the electeds who would win all the seats and move on. And they as the party sort of expanded and started to grow in power, they came up with the different ways in order to run. So it became, instead of having just electing in that simplistic way, that was you know, whoever has the largest mailing list, the electeds, it became, let's get people in from different structures, right? So it became, let's have people elected from central committees, which is how I'm currently elected, which in my perspective, is actually the most democratic because I had to run on the presidential ballot. So, you know, the widest possible people were able to vote for that. Central Committee, the ADEMs, you're able to recruit voters in. The solutions are a bit, there's many problems with the system, but the idea is that you can bring in as many voters as you can, and you can publicize it as widely as you can. Love it or hate it, there's a lot of different pluses and minuses to the system. And then to make up for it, the electeds are able to appoint some people to be delegates. That was the grand solution to a problem where basically the electeds were allowed to select who they wanted to vote to become delegates, to endorse them to run for office. So it was kind of a circular problem. And now with the change in systems, they're able to control or to appoint who they like directly by appointing, but people are able to recruit and run people to run for ADEM offices through their communities, through organizing, and they're able to recruit and appoint people to run for their central committees, and then to advocate and vote for who they like to run through their central committees. In the end, what that means is that we are all delegates, one big pool of 3,500 delegates who get to make all of these decisions and work together and who get to help make change, from whom we select people who are able to run to work on committees. I work on committees, Mike works on committees, and a great number of you here work on committees. But what it also means is that we provide a wider variety of voices from who to choose to work on those committees and provide input. And I think you all can see the obvious reason there, because you have a lot more voices, you have a lot more likelihood for your voice to be chosen to work on the committees and to help make the change that you want to see. And we'll get into that a little bit more. I'm sure we'll get several questions on that. The one thing I want to say about that is I want to strongly encourage each and every one of you who is a current delegate, ADEM, Central Committee elected, appointed, elected, any of it, to run to be considered after this convention to be on committees. Because once you get on that list, you are able to make a great deal of change at the, say grassroots, party level, that helps the wider variety of us to be able to actually input things. And from that, you can be considered to be on the executive board. As some of you know, having run, and I'm sure John will touch on this, you have the option to run to be on the CDP executive board, who ultimately votes on every single thing that happens with that happens within the CDP. We have to have a voice and a vote, and that vote that ratifies everything we do is from the CDP executive board. So it's very important that we have people who are willing to, number one, speak out, and number two, vote with a conscience. With that, I guess we'll go to John, and then we can go to Q&A.
Right on. Thanks for all of that, and thank you all for attending. My experience as a first-time candidate was, in a word, confusing. It was a bit chaotic, and being new to the concept of ADEM and not really understanding what it was at the onset, but learning a lot more about it in the immediate as I decided, yes, this is something I want to pursue, was difficult. As it wasn't the easiest to find information on it, but once I found the right people, it became a lot easier. But then getting connected to the election process was very difficult, and I'm not sure if this is unique to San Francisco, but the elections here are largely slate-based, and the controls of the various slates are in different hands, and how those are run between elected officials, adding people to slates, between club participation. There was just a ton of confusion around who owns these different pieces and who participates. So eventually, after talking to several people through different channels, I was appointed to our progressive slate here locally. There was a moderate slate that was running, and they were advertising themselves as progressive, which was really, really weird. But each of their candidates won, like every single person on that slate won elections. So none of our people were elected. locally, which was kind of odd, but that just kind of is what it is when there are those ways to make things happen in the background. At one point, we received the questionnaire from the Progressive Delegates Network, which was somewhat confusing, especially being a first-time candidate. The impression, it really felt strongly like, we'd love to support you, but in order to do that, we're going to ask you to pledge to vote, you know, XYZ for this person. Coming in not knowing who Rusty is and not knowing any of that history, it was very confusing and very, it almost felt suspect coming into it, and not having known the history and knowing that background. It just felt like my participation was conditioned on committing to my vote, which was, it just felt off. But I learned more about that, and it became a decision that became easy to make. But the big takeaway, I guess, was at least here in San Francisco, it's hard to be a progressive, and it's hard to be a progressive just based on sharing the progressive values. There was a lot of infighting between the clubs and electeds, and there was a lot of drama. And then to add to that, the way the ballots, you know, having those issues, and having, you know, people that I had reached out to who weren't receiving their ballots, and then the dates kept getting pushed back and back, and I couldn't give people, you know, the right answers. And when I felt like I could commit to, okay, go ahead and do it, they would push it back again, and I would reach out to another group, and it was just extraordinarily confusing across the board. And then the results, when the results came out, that was confusing as well, with different iterations of that. So it was largely confusing, and it was just confusing and off-putting in many ways. But in the big picture, I did meet lots of really good local activists and people who are making those changes, and also seeing the work that PDN and PDA are doing to really kind of increase the transparency, helps kind of rebuild my faith in the system, and help me, encourage me to continue my participation. But there really is, especially here in San Francisco, much more of a need of that transparency and that guidance through the whole process. It just seemed very well adapted to people who were very much ingrained in the systems and knew how to navigate the systems. But for a newcomer, it was really difficult. So thank you for the work that you're doing to help with the transparency and to support the candidates, but also our ideals. So it's felt and it's appreciated. So thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you, all of the speakers. I just wanted to say one little thing. John came into this process a little bit late, and because of the urging of many, many people, he ran, and he ran very well and only missed it by very, very small amounts. So I feel like I was inspired by the way in which a number of people ran with really strong community spirit and with a lot of positivity. And so I feel like in some respects, there were bright lights in our area. Next, we're just going to open it up to
Well, I
discussion
wonder.
of the panel.
Uh,
Mike, you want to lead
yeah,
that?
yeah. I wanted to ask the other two panelists, and the theory of the 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 that we talked about earlier, or 1/3 or ADEMs. How have you seen it basically corrupted in the past? In other words, is the makeup, as the way ADEMs run, does it do anything to stop, for instance, legislators from appointing people and helping them win in the ADEMs so that they can get the 2/3 basically?
I can start. So really it depends on the legislator, honestly, and on how much we hold them accountable and how much their goodwill towards working with us is realized. Here's the thing, right? So what typically happens, at least in my area, is that the legislators will ask for people to please try to run through ADEMs, or if you have run and been successful to be on your central committee, try to run that way and be considered. And then if not, then they'll appoint you. That's how we do it. In some other areas, really quite a lot of the state, what'll happen is they will run a slate and they will publicize that they are running that slate. And if you love politician X, then you will vote for their slate. And that's it. And they'll be able to appoint other people. It is not perfect, but weirdly, it kind of mirrors more the original intent of the way we elected delegates back in the day, because that's how they would do it. They'd run people and it would just be their people pretty much there to vote because nobody would know what was going on. The only difference is now they have a much bigger audience. And so some of them have changed their ways. Some of them came in much later, like in my area, because we haven't been really very blue very long. So they learned and got their feet wet by having to work and make goodwill with everybody, regardless of who they were. That's probably the goal, is to have everybody make goodwill and try to get everybody's vote. What has not helped is the way we have had ADEMs run in the past couple of cycles, or several cycles really, where you could come in and vote the second you got there. So if someone called you and, or, gave you a piece of paper walking in, really, that happens a lot. Personally been guilty of doing that. Gave you a piece of paper and say, hey, vote for this person or these people, then you would vote for those person or these people. And people like me are disruptors. So I'd send in one person and say, vote for this person also, and disrupt it and get my 1 or 2 people in because they were great people and they were just willing to talk to people a couple of 100 times. But typically what happens is that the people just, if you're an elected, you have a big old list of people that you can contact, and you would contact them all and say, vote for these people, please. And then you would appoint some other people. We all need to grow together. That's the truth. I mean, because when a system is set up that way, that you can just take your big mailing list, and the system was set up that way, then you just win. That's the truth of it. There's no real appreciable outreach to the public. It's simply too expensive to call the newspapers, to call the radio and say, hey, every Democrat in this assembly district, come on down and run for this role. And by the way, here's what it is. That would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, probably across the state, for that effort alone. But somewhere in the middle of all of that, it needs to be reimagined to a point where people just have an equal and equitable way of having outreach, at least saying this is the process, and any Democrat, even if you become one at the door, can participate. Now, I want to include, just as a little note, the thing that disappointed me most in this last cycle is that there was months and months and months of work done to reform the way that the ADEM process works to make it more equitable. And members of the executive board voted to just dump a lot of it and just, put it off on staff. So staff was like prepared to have boxes and prepared to have voting certain ways. And there were people who just didn't want to manage the boxes. Not me, I was prepared to climb up to the mountains and just sit there and manage a box, with my PPE on, with a number of other people, but we were outnumbered. So in order to have these things happen, we have to voice our, make our voices heard, which we can do as delegates from the floor, but more importantly, by running to be considered for appointments to committees. Because that's kind of where you get that extra voice. And I'll stop because I'm sure John has some very fresh thoughts that will really, really help us out.
Yeah, John, what have you observed?
It's hard to follow that. I would just add that again, I would just underline my observation that here in San Francisco, it was very slate based, and as Tisa mentioned, it was very connected to specific electeds. And what I think gummed up the process was the infighting between electeds and the clubs expecting, anticipating a level of participation and expecting somewhat of an entitlement to a certain number of seats on slates, and there was no consensus, and it was a cause for a lot of drama and a lot of, I think, very counterproductive energy in just pushing forward the values, but it was more identity based, and it felt more like a power grab in many cases.
So would you think, John, that that maybe the outlawing, say, of slates would be something that might be in order, and that people run as individuals instead of slates, especially if you consider that the slate mates, by combining their friends, basically, can almost guarantee a victory?
I see the value of slates in that I think we do want people that, you know, are active and that are collaborators. So I do see the value of having slates, and I don't really see a way of getting around kind of back channel slates. And so to that end, I wouldn't really think that abolishing them would be a way to move forward. I wouldn't know what to recommend to replace them. But yeah, I don't think abolishing them would be productive at this point.
Okay, well, I can tell you what I've observed, which is more and worse, I think, than what Tisa has observed. In years past, what was happening is that the electeds, in order to get the majority of the delegates, would go to some trouble to get in people that owed them a favor. And the way they would do it was several ways. They would have breakfasts the morning of voters, inviting voters for a free breakfast and then telling them who to vote for. The electeds would also spend money on mailers to get their slate in, and all sorts of things like that, really. And the end result was that it really was, it made it so that there were two ways that the electeds could get in delegates. And the problem with those delegates, or a problem with those delegates, is that once they voted to endorse whoever, you know, gave them the free breakfast or whatever, we never saw them again. They were of no real value to the CDP. You know, they literally didn't even go to meetings unless they were going there to vote. Or most of the votes take place, for instance, the votes for the officers take place on Saturday. The electeds would have officers they wanted to win. And what you would find is that in that officer election, and we're having one in a couple of months, that the new delegates would come in, vote for the officers, and go home and not attend anything other than the parties at the meetings. Did you observe that, Tisa?
You're forgetting the taco trucks. Quite a number of taco trucks.
Taco
Yeah,
truck.
that's the easiest way to get people in line to just vote for who you like, is to include the taco trucks, anything you feed, and kind of, right. Which is why we've had so many people who really have no understanding of what it is to be a delegate and what the power is after years and years and years of being a delegate. You know, it's kind of hanging out and doing that, and which to me is unfortunate, because a delegate to the CDP in California is basically your own private primary every single convention. There's great power in that. So, you know, don't be dissuaded by tacos, or I've heard some people provide incredibly great sandwiches. I've never had a sandwich worth my vote. There's quite a number of people who will bring you in and pay for your transportation if you agree to vote for whoever, which is one of the things John was talking about. Unfortunately, everybody with money does that. Look, here's the thing. If you were to buy the list of the entire CDP delegation right now, today, how many of you know how much it is? Anybody? Yeah, I'm sure Mike knows. $3,500. $3,500. You could go on a great vacation, or you could buy that list.
You know what? That's not correct. It costs $80.
No. It used to cost $80. I just tried to buy it.
Oh, they've raised the price.
They raised it up. It used to be $80 statewide, so you can do all the work you need to do. They raised it up to $3,500 for the entire state, and they prorate it down depending on the area that you live in. So it'll be a portion of that. But if you want just the delegates in your area, it's going to be some rough proportion, somewhere around $1,000 just for your area. If you're going to run for, say, regional director, unless if you're going to help your friend running. If you're running, it's free. It used to be $80,
okay.
and for years it was $50, all good. But the costs are going up instead of down. But the benefit is that each of us knows people who vote for Democrats, people who have no idea what this system is at all, no clue, but they want to support Democrats, and they don't quite understand until each of us explains it to them that this is basically a Democratic primary for us, and that they need to get involved, and why and how. So what we have the advantage of is to explain, and knowledge is free. Knowledge is really free. What and how and why they should get involved and keep their information. We have to stay organized. And I don't know if anybody makes a great taco, maybe you want to do that, but we have to stay organized.
Let me add something else that I observed, and maybe the two of you, maybe this didn't happen this time because it was vote by mail, but in the past, in most of the ones in the past, I discovered that what was happening was the voting was taking place. What would happen is each assembly district would rent a room, a big room. People would come into the room, register, vote, throw their ballot into a ballot box, then it would be counted by hand. It was then the responsibility of what they called the facilitator, who often was the regional director. And the facilitator would then take the ballots and mail them back to the CDP. But before they did that, they would call the CDP to tell them what the results were. And in the past, what would happen would be the regional directors or the facilitators, whoever did it, would actually tell the CDP that their slate won when they didn't. And that was being on the committee to reform the ADEMs. That was one of the primary things we wanted to keep from happening. You may have noticed in the last, in the ADEM that just ended, that it was all vote by mail. But even if it hadn't been vote by mail, it would be without a facilitator. In other words, it would be mailed directly to the CDP without the possibility of interference. So I don't know, have you observed that? I see some hands up, but we went to a lot of trouble to keep that from happening this time.
There was one change in the last in-person one, though, that maybe two, maybe it's because I bought too much pizza, but last two, where they had to provide after the fact copies of everyone who attended and all of their information to the party chairs. So if there was something kind of weird, I mean, I'm blessed. I have some good regional directors, but that I work with, and who have enough common sense to step away from the voting, which is why I end up with the pizza, because I didn't have a horse in the race at all. So, just everybody. But that was one of the pivots, kind of reforms they came up with in between, is that they have to provide that information. And there's a question in the comments that specifically is one of the big reasons why we do not have private ballots. Everything is public, because if your vote shows something against what you think you voted, then you have the right to challenge what is represented as your vote.
And that scenario is not something that I've witnessed, as this is my first year, but I've definitely heard lots of stories and similar stories about things like that happening. But it seems to me like vote by mail, if the kinks can be worked out and if the timelines can be worked out, seems the most logical way moving forward to avoid those kind of situations and similar things with, like it's bringing in busloads of people to vote on the day of, things like that. Just it's a more even playing field, I think, with everyone's voting. by mail.
Okay.
One important note there is the in-person process has always included a way of voting in a provisional manner. And we did not have that this last time. So whether you are just becoming a Democrat or whether you simply did not receive a ballot, the in-person had a provisional manner, and the process that came out of the ad hoc group was to have a provisional drop box manner, and we would just reconcile it on the back end, which was dropped by the executive board. And that was, if you ask me, that was not good decision making, because we just went through an entire presidential election where we chose to advocate for people being able to vote provisionally in a number of different manners. And then we did not honor that in ourselves. That's a bit hypocritical.
Right. Although the real reason for doing it was because of COVID. You know, they didn't want people to, it was the executive board, you're right, that voted to have it vote by mail only. But the reasoning behind it was so that people wouldn't be exposed to COVID. That
They could
wasn't,
have left them in a box for a couple of days and then had a company deal with them.
yeah, that's all
It's
true.
COVID safe.
That's definitely true. So, Hemming, you want to throw it open to the
Yes.
134 people?
I'm going to moderate this next section, which is going to be the panelists fielding questions that we've been able to cull from the chat box. Unfortunately, we're not observing the raise hand function during this meeting because we just have 90 minutes for this and we want to get to as many people's questions as possible. So we're only giving the panelists speaking rights. I apologize to those of you who wanted to speak, but please type into the chat box where we're aggregating the questions. The first question, way early on, somebody had asked how many of the people who did not vote for Rusty Hicks, CDP chair, the first round, was were placed on committees. I believe that was the question. Did anybody want to respond to that on the panel?
I can. I don't want to dominate, but maybe I've been, you know, involved enough that I've observed it. I was, in fact, co-chair of a committee. A committee consists of lead chairs, co-chairs, and then members. And I did not vote for Rusty. And then when he took over and assigned the committees, I wasn't on a committee. I then looked to see in the committee that I was in, which was the Organizational Development Committee, who were the co-chairs. And what I noticed, I don't know who voted for whom, but I did notice this. I noticed that, first of all, there were 25 people on the committee, and it had 10 chairs or co-chairs. So almost half the members were co-chairs. The Organizational Development Committee doesn't do a lot except every 10 years when redistricting occurs. So there was nothing for them to do. But so then I looked at their background, and without exception, all of them were staff members of legislators.
Oh, I see. I see. Okay.
So-
Now I can't speak for the other committees, but
Yeah, and I can speak for the one that I serve on. So I didn't vote for Rusty. In fact, not only did I not vote for Rusty in the last election, but I was literally a surrogate for Kimberly Ellis in several debates. And I was dogged in my perseverance because I know her personally, I know her well, and I know her leadership skills. So I was very proud to be a surrogate for her. I was appointed a co-chair, and I have a number of people who were appointed on my committee who were people who worked with me closely to help elect her, you know, and do what they needed to do. But here's the thing, and maybe it's just my special corner of the world, and because I am just one of those people where, you know, I have a lot to lose. I'm Mexican, I'm Black, and I live in Riverside County, and everyone assumes that we're just like a red lost cause. So, you know, I'm like, I got to shoot my shot, no matter what it is, and get it done. But, you know, I shot my shot, and it was respected enough to keep working and keep growing and keep doing things. So, I benefited personally, but much more than that, I was able to get some people who worked with me to apply and to be considered and to run for office for those seats. And I would never say that just because you do or don't support some candidate that you should not. I would say that you should be dogged in your values. You should work extraordinarily hard, and you should show who you are and rep wherever you're from and whoever you are for. And just do that. And, watch, I've been in the party I'm in, I've been here 12 years. It took years for people to notice, beyond volunteering, my leadership skills to lead. And, but they did. And I would never say, as somebody who is from a cross section of disenfranchised groups, that you should not try or that you should let anything be an excuse for not making a difference. So I would encourage all of you to just do it. Just try. Just stick your head out there and be loud and proud, because volume works a lot in this party.
John, did you have anything to add on that?
No, I can't add to that. That was awesome.
I'm going to pick up the next question that was given to us, which is kind of a basics, and so it brings in more people, I think. A very basic question, which is, why everybody who is a registered Democrat have a ballot? Does anybody want to take that one? I think it was a suggestion as well as a question, like why.
One more time, please. Couldn't quite hear it.
Why isn't everybody in California who is a registered Democrat given a ballot for the ADEMs election?
Well, having written the contract to have the ballots printed, I can tell you that the ballots, besides the printing, the mailing and stuff, was about $1.50 a person. There are, I forget how many registered Democrats there are. Somehow the number 3.5 million, somebody out there probably knows the exact number, but there's a hell of a lot. And that would be $4.5 million to contact every Democrat with a ballot. And that, I'm sure, is the primary reason why it had to be done the way it was. I think the fundamental thing that needs to be changed is just figuring out who votes and how we contact them. And I have no ideas on how to do that. But contacting every Democrat just is unaffordable.
Plus the changes in registration too, though. We had a 25% increase in Democratic voter registration. There's no way you'd find those people every single day. So it would be extraordinarily hard.
And on the Ben's side as well, I'd be curious to know, out of those that did register to mail, that did register to vote by mail, actually voted, and how many didn't vote. I think that would be a compelling number to look at if considering expanding it.
Yeah, I don't know those numbers. I do know that what we, 2 years ago, there was something like 35,000 people. Is that number right? 35,000? Yeah.
Yeah.
Roughly 35,000 people voted 2 years ago. And when it went to vote by mail, we, and I'm not part of the we in this case, the powers that be estimated that that might go up to 60,000. So in the contract, we contracted for 60,000 ballots and mailed out, to mail out and to count. And all those things cost money because we had them counted by a third party to keep the fraud down. Little did we know that we hadn't thought of every possible kind of fraud, but that's a whole nother question. So we were figuring on roughly 60,000. There ended up being 170,000, which means if you multiply that out, that's a heck of a lot of money. And of the 170,000, approximately 60,000 of them got returned. So the estimate that the CDP made was pretty close, but the amount of people that registered to vote was a lot more than that. and they didn't vote. And we know they didn't vote because they had to mail it back in. My theory is they didn't know what the ballot was for. And so it just went into the recycling, which is what I would have done probably if I hadn't known. And if think of if we hit 3 or 4 million Democrats, how much recycling there would be to be done and how expensive it would be. So
Is a little follow up on that, Mike. Do you mind if I cut you off
please,
there?
please.
Because we have some other questions to go as
Yeah.
well. So the next sort of follow up that is about whether or not we can do this electronically so that it's less expensive, but if we can do that in such a way that can be fraud resistant. Can somebody speak to that?
So, I've given this some thought, really, because there's a couple of other organizations that I belong to that have successfully had caucuses and voted electronically. There's all kinds of new technologies that you can actually listen to people. But here's the thing, is that is the critical part, right? Listening to people speak, because you don't know how awesome a candidate is until you hear them really talk about where they've been, what they're doing, what their life experience is, and and what their vision is for their participation. It's bringing that part somehow back in so that we can do that. And there's all kinds of new technologies where we can allow people across districts. I can tell you some of our assembly districts out here are ginormous. They're huge. There's no way you can meet everybody in an entire assembly district, and asking somebody to go from one end to the other is quite a lot. But I would think involving some of the new technologies and asking people to do that, and then having some of these testing, we have to beta test some of these technologies, but so that people can vote and show who they are as they're in meetings, might actually work for us. But a lot of that is kind of this post-COVID world. How much do we want to have in person versus how much do we want to have a virtual appearance? Because there's something about looking somebody in the eye and shaking their hand. And there's something about meeting somebody who, if you are in the 42nd Assembly District, who is all the way out on the state line, and you never would have had a chance to meet that person except virtually, the trade-offs. But I really think we need to reconvene, have more discussion, and come up with a way to balance these things, especially after COVID.
And I'm certain that there will be another committee meeting that will be rebuilt between now and the next election. I can also tell you this, having been on the committee and having been the person that worked on the balloting process and the counting process, that we were told to not even consider electronic balloting for 2 reasons. One of them is it has a reputation for fraud, whether or not that can be over, if that can be canceled out, we weren't even to discuss that. But the other is that so much of California, and especially in the rural areas, they don't have the ability to vote electronically. Either they don't have internet, they don't have computers, they don't have a bunch of things. So the idea of having an actual paper ballot was so that there would be something to look at in case of a recount, and that everyone would have an equal opportunity to vote and throw it in the mail.
Great, thank you. Next question, how can we ban legislators from interfering in the ADEMs when they already appoint 1/3 of the delegation? Tisa looks like she wants to speak, but I can't hear you because you're muted.
Oh, I have a lot of thoughts. The number one thing for me, and this is kind of a little grassroots, and those who are kind of jaded won't agree with me, but I think for my money, I would literally just put out a pledge, a publicly noticed pledge that I will not, and kind of like stare them in the eye and demand that they all do that. They sign the pledge and then call them out where it happens. Because the weird thing is once they step outside of their constitutional authority and get away from their list, they can still have other lists, right? Just because you don't use your campaign dollars to buy a $3,500 list doesn't mean you can't use your other private donor, or your friends can't buy it for you, some other kind of weird thing. But I think we have to, people love to call it cancel culture. I don't think it's cancel culture. I think it's personal responsibility culture. I think we have to hold people to personal responsibility in order to do that. That's how I would prefer to do it. That's how I tend to live my life, is I will hold you personally responsible for what you do. And if you are going to violate what you say you're going to do, I'm going to call my 200 closest friends, and they're going to tell their 200 closest friends, and you are probably not going to get reelected, because I so wholeheartedly believe in electoral politics. And that's kind of the spirit of our democracy. I mean, the other way is we could just kind of ban them or make some kind of CDP rule, but I think that's less effective than good old fashioned daylight. I believe in daylight.
Mm-hmm. And when you say they, I assume you're talking about the electeds. They're
not just the electeds, but also the highest finishing Democrats. Just because you didn't win your seat doesn't mean you don't have a campaign war chest. And I think you should be held at the same exact level. Same thing.
Mm-hmm. And how would you punish them if they violated it?
Oh, daylight. I would literally publish a list on the website and just kind of put out email links to say, these are the people who are not honoring their pledges. Mm-hmm. That's me.
But I assume it would have to be us doing it, not the CDP, because the CDP would never call out.
I think their entire obligation is to put it somewhere on the website so all of these creative and lovely people can find that and call people out as they feel appropriate. Mm-hmm. And then everything else is organizing. This party is built on organizing. So, we could organize like crazy and get it done. If somebody is so great in Congress and that's just kind of what they do, fine, great. We continue to love them and the work they do. But if people are so invested in just running people for the ADEMs, that might actually be a problem that we have to address, is who is so invested in running things in an ADEM election as opposed to getting, the fight for 15 passed.
So back to the political questions, we have a question from the audience. Should I leave the Democratic Party because of how they treated Bernie Sanders during the 2020 election? Please, let's have a few responses to this. I like that Tisa's already shaking her head.
I'm so sorry. I have big hair. It shakes itself. This is my big gripe with a lot of people, okay? I come from a family of people who had to fight literally in the Civil War to be able to vote. And they could only vote in 1 or 2 cycles, and similarly, I am, I'm descendant by slavery from a president who was a Democrat, but the wrong kind of Democrat. And what I will say is the party is ours, always has been, always will be. And if people don't like the way that we work in the party, then it's incumbent upon us to fight for our party as opposed to just leaving it. You have to work for the things that you have value. And the truth is, if we're not talking about who gets a cocktail at a party, we're not talking about who gets a tote bag. We're talking about who has a seat at the table. And, literally the table belongs to us. Don't give away the table, ever.
As a Sanders and a socialist, personally, I can't argue with that and support that more. I mean, I've been through this with so many people, so many comrades and colleagues who are fed up and, just against anything that represents big politics and big party. But exactly like Tisa said, this is ours, and the only way that we're going to affect the changes is from within, and to force our representation and to move the party forward together.
Mm-hmm. And as I see it, this is kind of off the topic of this meeting, but what I've observed is that what happened in 2016 and to a lesser extent in 2020 was it was the DNC itself that mistreated, I guess is a good word, Bernie Sanders and those of us who are Bernie Sanders delegates. What I've seen is that the new DNC that was elected last summer is far more Bernie centric, although I doubt seriously if he's going to run again. And what the point that I would make out of that is they did not leave the party. Instead, they moved higher up in the party to have a bigger voice. And that's what Tisa's been talking about the whole time is the idea is to stay inside. You can't make change from the outside.
That's
Look,
100%
while you stay in the party, if you can't have Bernie, look, we all wanted Bernie, especially this last time. There was like no argument. But I mean, maybe we can have Nina Turner or AOC or somebody. We got a bench full of people. If we can't have Bernie, then he will influence the election.
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
stick with us and we'll get Tisa elected.
Yes. Okay, so the next question is, and this is a common one that I've heard from a lot of people. I registered, did not get a ballot. I complained to staff to no avail. I was simply told that my ballot was mailed. Can someone explain the dynamics around the executive board voting against drop boxes? I don't know what drop boxes is. Can someone take that?
I think I already mentioned that. The problem with drop boxes, that was the intention, was to have drop boxes. And that is, in a public election in California, maybe not in the red states, is that you can vote by mail, you can vote at a polling place, or you can go to a library that has literally a box you can drop your ballot into. That's the drop box. That was the original intention for this election until COVID.
Can you take though what happened, why so many people registered for a ballot and then didn't receive it? Does anybody want to take that one?
I have an idea of what happened.
I do
kinda-
too. Why don't you
Okay.
start? We'll see if we match up.
All right. The idea of what I had happen is that I had heard that people were registered by other people and they would get ballots and then be told who to vote for. And that might account for the difference some of the difference between 60,000 and that was estimated and that more or less came in, and the 175,000 ballots that went out. And I alluded to that a little bit when I said there was kinds of fraud that the committee hadn't even considered. In other words, there are a lot of very clever people out there who know how to game the system, and it apparently was gamed.
Yeah, another way too, and it's a weird combination of things, is they typically check your registration either in PDI or in VAN, right? They don't check it with the registrars of voters around the counties or with the Secretary of State. They check it in those systems, which are late to update. So if your name, this is similar to kind of what we had, some of the duplicate ballots, but if your name is spelled kind of differently than how you identify, or if something's happened with your voter registration, you just weren't going to get a ballot because they didn't have the time to do it. Like there was not enough time to verify that you are who you say you are. I know people who have, we all know these people. They have one name and they have a family name that everyone's known them by for 20 years. And they put their name in according to the family name that everyone's had them for 20 years. But it's not their registered legal voter name, or somebody who got married 10 years ago and they hyphenated, but then they decided they like their regular name, and they go by and they wrote in what they call themselves every day. You weren't going to get a ballot according to that. You had to have enough time, energy, staffing in order to verify all of those things. Now, if you had the provisional voting system, that would have been an opportunity to go, okay, person, what are you actually registered as? Didn't happen. Because we didn't have that, it was either we accept your ballot, accept your registration, or we don't, and you're not going to get a ballot. Somewhere between those two systems, a whole lot of people weren't able to get a ballot, and there was not a lot of thought in the executive board on how to bridge that gap versus the committee that took months and months and months and months to really think about these things, had kind of fleshed it out and things got destroyed. So what I would have liked is a little bit more thought, and I spoke on that subject, and a bunch of other great people spoke on that subject about, hey, come on guys, how do we make sure that people are captured? You know, we have areas of the state that don't have snow, rain to the greatest extent that some of the other areas have. Can we have the opportunity to do that work? Because we would like to do that work and are volunteering to do that work. But that was shouted down, and that comes from the executive board. And unfortunately, staff was blamed a lot for that. And that's something you have to plan for, and we didn't. And that's a huge regret for me, you know, that I wasn't able to persuade enough people to plan.
So I have a slight pivot, and this is a great follow-up to that one, which is for those of us who lost our ADEM election, like me, what are good ways to get involved in this process, or in general, get involved going forward? Very positive. Thank you, whoever asked that question. Ideas from the panel?
Well, since no one else is saying anything, what I would do is, assuming you haven't already, join some clubs, democratic clubs that are chartered by your county Democratic Party. Get involved in your county Democratic Party and get elected into your county Democratic Party as a person who is known to be an activist and someone that would be valuable to the party. And then you can get it once you're in your county party, then you can actually be appointed to be in the CDP as a delegate. That's one of the three ways that people get in. And that's probably the best way. I know in my case, I first got in through the ADEMs, and from then on, I was getting in through my county party.
So the deadlines for this year for all the county parties are all the same. So for the county parties, for the ADEMs, for the appointments, it was all the same. It's kind of weird because they stack them so you can try 1, 2, 3. You know, if you don't get one, you can get the other. But if you want to go to this convention virtually or the next thing, or I mean, honestly, even to the executive board meetings, which I would encourage you all to attend, proxies. People know you work hard. If you are the #1 incredibly creative person and everyone knows it, which, you know, you may be the best activist you know, but in the background, it's time to start tooting your own horn, becoming an alternate on your central committee, getting to know some of the delegates in your committee. Because the truth is that a great many of these people don't do everything. They either can't, you know, when we go back to in person, they can't stay the whole time. And so for the bulk of the business, you can just go and participate, or they can't really do, you know, they're just not as interested. You know, they have conflicts, whatever. You can be their proxy.
Tisa, thank you so much for lending all of your knowledge to this meeting. I just want to weigh in as somebody from South Orange County and the person who actually organized this meeting. We actually, we had a lot of stuff go on in South Orange County. What we had happen down here was that the congressional representatives, because we just flipped 3 congressional seats, and then we ended up losing one of them, right? And they really wanted to have control over who the assembly delegates were going to be, because they want to get those endorsements, those party endorsements. And there's been a lot of complaints. And so I want to throw this out there to you guys to discuss it, because there's the Progressive Delegates Network. There's some rumors about what they might have been doing, but there's also been some rumors about what the unions might have been doing. But we really don't have a lot of union influence in South Orange County. There was legit only like 2 candidates running down here who got union endorsements, and they were not on slates, and they did not get elected. But the people who swept the seats in my district were all endorsed by Katie Porter, by Mike Levin, and by Harley Ruda. And so we have various dynamics happening up and down the state. And this is really why I wanted to organize this meeting, is to talk about the weird dynamics that are going on and how people influence the delegate elections, because it really should be a grassroots situation where we're activists in our community, we're representing our communities, and yet we have these weird influences that are making it hard for activists like myself to get in. So that's all I wanted to say, y'all.
So here's the thing, though, it really has to be repeated super, super clearly and over again. I get that everybody wants to have this be like the people's way of becoming a delegate, but the truth is it was never intended to be that. It's the goal. So if you want this to be like the people's way of becoming a delegate, the people's way of getting engaged, then you have to fight for that. You have to fight, you have to disclose, you have to organize, you have to get involved with your unions. There are always lots of Democrats in unions, but the problem is unions are made of all kinds of different people. They all think differently. And you have to get people to kind of loud and proud shout out what their values are and get involved with that. If you can be a union steward and go rep people and live your values, then you can vote your values, and you can talk your values. I know a lot of great union people who do that, but we have to encourage everyone to do that. The people's way of becoming a delegate is the goal. It's not the reality. So you have to keep your eye on the prize and you have to keep working. And it's never the time to get confused or to think that someone is going to do what you want, because they're not. They're going to do what they want. They want to get their people in, and then they want to get more of their people in another way. And you have to fight for it and love your community into realizing what the goal is. And that sounds nebulous, but it's the truth. Love your community into realizing what the goal is.
You're absolutely right, Tisa. I mean, it's not even that like the one organization is worse than the other or whatnot. It's really a matter of who is better at organizing and how they get their people in. And it can be ugly sometimes, and it can be hurtful. And I think we just need to be better stewards of the Democratic Party.
But the truth is, nobody knows your neighbors better than you do.
Right.
Nobody knows the people you grew up with better than you do. No one will have more influence with them than you will.
Oh, sorry. Hold on a second. I think the panelists are able to unmute themselves. Can you do that now? No, you're not able to. Hold on. Did that work, Tisa?
Got it. Yeah, that's just the truth. No one will be able to communicate that lesson better than you can, but you have to do it first. Don't wait till like the weekend before and say, hey, I need you to come out, or hey, I need you to fill out this piece of paper. You need to take a list of all your friends and family, good old fashioned street organizing, write it all out and check them off every time you have a conversation. Check them off, check them off, check them off, check them off. Same thing with raising money. Check them off, check them off. Everybody that you love, say, look, I love you. And because of that, I want you to be involved in this critical opportunity that fits into your life.
Yes.
Just piggybacking real quick off of what Mike brought up earlier about the clubs. A lot of the times, the clubs aren't always the most attractive way to go. So being creative and creating something in a space when available, and maybe creating your own club if there's space for it in your county, or creating some other type of organization that can help support and help unify the progressives, as opposed to splitting them up into different groups.
Right. I think we can now move on to this next question, which is a little bit spicy, but I think we can handle it. I've heard that the CDP is a dictatorship and the chair makes all the decisions, and that even the CDP elected officials don't get a voice or a vote. Is that true? And where does the three-legged stool fit into this dictatorship rumor?
I can just say, yes, it's true. Next. And it has been for a long time. I actually ran to be controller of the state party. And the dirty little secret that those of us who were running was that it's a title only and no one, and they don't even hold meetings. That improved a little bit in the early years of Eric Bauman's term. But, you know, it didn't last. And then when Rusty came in, it went back to the way it was. And the biggest complaint that you would hear from the 4 non-chairs, you know, there's the chair and then 4 other positions, was we don't even meet. And I don't know what to do about it, except maybe get in a chair who will pledge to actually have it be the party run by the 5 officers and listen to the rest of us. Because right now what the party is, and maybe this isn't, you got me on a soapbox and I'll get off as soon as possible. But to me, one of the biggest problems in the party is that it is top down only. You go into the party as a DSCC member thinking you're going to be able to make change, and sometimes you can, but for the most part, it's you being told what the party expects of you rather than the other way around. Okay, so now that I've gotten myself in trouble with the party, I'll shut up for at least a minute or so.
Okay, here comes a really great question from Robin Kropp from San Francisco. Hi, Robin. I'd like to hear more about what ADEM people do regarding California Democratic politics. How do they get to work on issues more so as ADEM delegates? How do they connect to our state reps and legislative action? How does the public get to hear what's going on within the party? And how do they get more input into the system? Great question. Goes to the heart of it.
So one thing I want to remind you all, and this is critically important, ADEM process is one part of how you become a delegate, all 3,500 of us, right? All 3,500 of us are the collective universe of who can vote for what when it comes to endorsing all these candidates. So the danger is here that people will only want to organize with other people elected from the ADEM process, which means you are neglecting to work with 2/3 of Democrats who can help you create change and who you don't know until you talk to. So, don't neglect 2/3, talk to everybody and do it. And I'll tell you very short abbreviated version of a story that I love to tell people because it's probably the #1 story I have about how you can make change. So I remember the California Senate race, because this is in fact for all of us our own private primary, because we are choosing who's basically going to get most of the funding. I had both major candidates for state Senate, for U.S. Senate in the last cycle, calling, and I got mad because I worked at Caltrans in San Bernardino, and we had just had the terrorist attack right outside my work, and I had people who were hurting, and we had people in our union who were like literally killed, all this stuff. And I got just really mad one day, and I told one candidate's person that I don't want to hear about how much you think I'm great or whatever, because I'm 1 vote and whatever, and you think you can get some percentage. I want your candidate physically down here talking to our members, because their families are in pain now. Otherwise, you can't have my vote. And the first one down here gets my endorsement. And I wasn't anything but a delegate at the time. And then I called up the other person's representative, and I told him the exact same thing. And the first person down got my endorsement, got the endorsement of a lot of other people area. And that person was Kamala Harris. First person to get down here and not talk, not complain. That's what you can do as a delegate to this party. You can say, you want me to vote for you? You better do something for my community. And you better not ask me for something cute or offer me something fun, because it's a very small primary, basically. And you can force, because you're one of a very small subset of people to do the right thing instead of offering you something, because they will offer you a lot of fun things. but you can force them to do the right thing instead. And that's your power. That's really your power.
Great. Okay, if nobody else wants to pick up on that, I'm going to move forward to this next question. It's kind of a particular one, which has to do with the Scantron ballot. So rather than eliminate slates, somebody who ran on a victorious PDN slate, I'd rather see ADEMs use proportional ranked choice voting. Scantron ballots make that possible. Could the panelists consider that and share their thoughts?
Could you repeat that? I didn't get the gist of that. Was it a suggestion for what?
Wants to suggest proportional ranked choice voting
Oh, okay.
Scantron ballots.
Sure. I mean, that would be something that would make perfect sense to me. There's a number of committees. I would refer you to the ad hoc committee member who's likely to be one again in the future here, Mike Thaller, to make that suggestion, because he's probably, as soon as he gets the appointment, going to be your greatest voice in on that conversation. But also you can respond to any committee executive board member and say, look, I would like you to help us make this suggestion. You could submit a resolution. You could make a suggestion to committees and get people, because there's a threshold number of delegates and it's a lower threshold of executive board members to get something considered. Is it a guarantee? No, but if you try and try and try to get something, then it can happen. But organizing, sure, I like ranked choice.
Mm-hmm. I'd also add that ranked choice, I think, to me on the back end, just for candidates, opens up the opportunity to encourage coalitions as opposed to competition. It really encourages a more positive environment for everyone involved, and opens up again that opportunity to build strong coalitions of like-minded people.
Mm-hmm. And the fact is, we actually did design a ballot for the ADEMs that was ranked choice. Obviously, it didn't get used. It becomes very difficult to do ranked choice voting when you're voting for 14 people out of 50. Ranked choice voting works if there's one candidate running for a position, and it might be jerry-rigged a little bit to work for 2 candidates running for a position, but 14, maybe it can be done. It's nothing I've ever figured out. It's a practical problem. It isn't, the idea of ranked choice voting, I think, is excellent. I just don't know how you can implement it in the ADEMs. Maybe you can. Maybe it's something we should be discussing for the next 2 years.
Transparent study. That's about the best thing.
Mm-hmm.
Get it there.
Okay, so we do have a question about the conveners, and I wanted to give the 10-minute warning. We have only 10 minutes to wrap up everything, and so the suggestion was, why don't we let conveners organize who's best in their district? I'm sure some people here have thoughts on that. At this point, I do want to offer that the panelists give some concluding remarks and anything that you didn't get to say earlier, and then I'll do a closing. You want to go first, Tisa? You look like you know.
I always have thoughts, so never mind my face because it's always thinking. Yeah, sure. Conveners, having been a convener, having assisted conveners over the years, there's quite a bit of latitude, but most importantly, the thing is to have the steps and responsibilities so people are clearly know what to do in the fallbacks. And in some cases, it's been quite good. Some cases, especially early on, it wasn't as easy, but I think that one of the big things we could probably use is some very clear training for conveners, so we all have the same expectations. Because I've compared notes with some conveners over the years, and we do things very differently. So one single set of expectations I would applaud it. For my concluding remarks, I'd just like to say thank you, everyone. I applaud your passion. Whether you are or are not a delegate, stay involved. I would encourage each and every one of you. If you are not able to be a delegate right now and you cannot find a proxy, volunteer. First thing I did with the CDP at the state level, besides my Young Dems activity, was I volunteered and I did security. I got in every room doing security. Right now, if you are doing we're all going to put something out pretty quickly. They're looking for people to help run the Zoom. We're literally looking for questions in the chat, things like that. You get in every room. You get to participate in everything and at least learn. So get in the room and figure out how to stay in the room. But, once you're in the room, you see how the room operates. I'm here. Reach out to me. I love to talk to everybody. I love to see people grow, and I love to see progress. Thanks.
Thank you, Tisa. Who wants to go next?
Yes, I can jump in. I don't really have anything to add as far as convenership goes, but as far as just a closing statement, I just wanted to, again, thank everyone for your participation. It's literally the thing that keeps me going. And I won't be participating as a delegate this cycle. Didn't get elected or appointed, but I look forward to doing it again, and I look forward to volunteering and participating still in the process, and also fighting with you all, to help bring more transparency and make this a fair fight for everyone, and to move forward, our progressive values. So thanks to each and every one of you.
Okay, I suppose it's my turn. The idea of having conveners pick the people who should run, was that the concept? Whatever it is, one of the charges of the ad hoc ADEM committee was to get the ability to tamper with the results out of the process, and keeping the conveners away from the ballots and away from the counting was something that was discussed. The solution was the vote by mail and drop box. To put the conveners, to give them that much power. Well, let me tell you something that happened that I saw firsthand. In fact, it was in one of the first ADEMs that I ran in. What I found was there was the convener. In this particular example, the regional director wasn't part of it, but there was a convener in the particular assembly district, and they were watching the ballots as people were dropping them in the ballot box. And the convener would then get on the phone, and I'm in San Diego, and my district includes San Diego State, the university. The convener getting on the phone and calling the dorms and asking for all Democrats who are registered in San Diego to come and vote for the convener's choices. That's the kind of thing that we want to avoid at all costs. I think that the decision, which was a decision by the committee, it wasn't told to us what we were supposed to do in this case. I think the decision to get conveners and regional directors out of the process as much as possible, I think was a good one. And we didn't have that kind of fraud. We had different kinds of fraud, but we didn't have that one. So I'd be definitely opposed to that. And as a closing statement, I would say that ideally what we would want to do is maybe from some of the ideas that have come up in this meeting, and from you in the chats, and from you maybe even sending emails to us, are things that are legitimate complaints in some cases, legitimate ideas in some cases. But right now, there's you need to, don't want to say it so it sounds rude, you need to sit on your ideas for a little bit, because I believe that what's going to happen is there will be a reconvening of an ad hoc ADEM committee meeting. When it happens, find out when the testimonies occur. You'll be able to testify by mail or actually online. And when that time comes, and who knows when it will be, but probably in a year or so. Send your ideas in or come in person and testify. And that really is where most of the ideas came from this time. So that's my recommendation. And I am so happy to have the opportunity to share my ideas with you. And by making it so you're all muted, it made it so that I didn't get the people telling me how stupid I was. So I appreciate that opportunity too. And not to mention Heyman and Jenna and some people that you haven't seen, Nathan, for instance, and I'm leaving out some names that helped put this thing together. I'm the president of the organization that put it together. And I want to thank the people that helped. And most of all, I want to thank the, I don't even know how many of you there were. There were at least 130 that actually joined the meeting. I want to thank you all for coming and sharing your ideas, or at least loaning us your brain to come up with some ideas to help the situation. So thank you.
John for joining us, and to Nathan for hosting, and Wade for helping to host and field questions. Thank you, Jenna, for the original idea to have this forum. I wanted to pick up on one thing and then close the meeting out. There was something mentioned in the chat about the rural communities, and I wanted to highlight that city and rural communities have very different needs, and we absolutely need to address poverty, access, energy. We need relief from the pandemic. We need healthcare for all. We need Green New Deal. We need childcare. We need schools to open. We need land back and Native tribes to be recognized. We need to have peace and safety for all people, people of color, immigrants, documented or undocumented. This country decides if you are legal, if you are valid or not, and we need everyone to be valid, to be treated with dignity and respect. And I just wanted to send out so much love to everybody in this community. I'm really encouraged and inspired by the progressive community that it continues to fight and cooperate and to treat people decently. And I'm so thankful for all of you. I hold you in so much esteem and gratitude. Thank you everyone for joining, and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.